Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about how does the IDF check their weapon. Now, I'm going to surprise you because we do it very, very differently than the US military and the US civilian world. And I'm going to try to tell you why we got to this system and why I changed it and the discipline problems that we have in our side and why it needed to be done. So let's go over this pretty clearly. In the 90s and in the beginning of the 2000s, the way a soldier would check a weapon would be that he would come to the weapon, he would cock the weapon, twice or three times, take a look inside, open up the safety, and pull the trigger. And that's how every gun was checked in the IDF. You finish the range, you're going into a base, you're going onto a bus, you're going into the field. We would always be checking our weapons. Check, 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 check. Always checking the weapon, which, by the way, I'm totally against. So don't touch it, it won't do anything bad to you. So every time we would do, we have to open up the safety and pull the trigger. So we had an immense amount of misfires. And the amazing thing, the amazing paradox in all of this is that we would check a weapon to make sure it's safe. And because we checked the weapon, we had an accidental discharge. And let's try to understand this. When you shoot a gun, you got to cock the gun, you got to open up the safety, and you got to pull the trigger. Those are the three actions you must do to shoot a round. And when we were checking the gun in the IDF, the same thing we did. We cocked it twice, opened up the safety, and pulled the trigger. What a shock that we had so many accidental discharges during the checking of the weapon. Why? We had this sign on every one of our bases. Every base in the IDF had on the gate, please check your weapon before you come in. So they would be in what we call Noam Levish said that we would be in a system where you had a magazine in the gun because you were in the territories and you walk around with the magazine in, and you would get to this gate that you have to go into. And the guy who's guarding it is a cook or not a fighter, and you want to show him how cool you are. So they would do it so fast, they would check the gun so fast that they wouldn't realize that the magazine was still in there, and they would actually put the bullet in, open up the safety, and pull the trigger because they did it in less than a second. They wanted to look cool. You were cool if you did that. And then suddenly the bullet's out, you can't bring it back anymore. I hated this. I hated this with a passion. Now you can see a lot of soldiers on the IDF. You look on Google, you'll see that they all have like an orange tab in their guns that they call it Mekporek on my name. And it's a system that actually puts a plastic rail, kind of similar to this yellow one, but from the chamber side, it sticks out like a safety tech. And then when you cock it, it flies out. But once it's in, there's a little flag outside, and you understand that there's no bullet in the chamber. And if there's no bullet in the chamber, you really don't need to check a gun. Because why do you check a gun? You check a gun because you do not know if there's a bullet in the chamber. If we could make this see-through and to be a window, and we could see inside, we would never check a gun. I think checking a gun is bad. I think opening up a safety and pulling a trigger should be done only once in your life, when you want to shoot. Opening up a safety is like a safety zone. It's a fence protecting me. Pulling the trigger is another fence protecting me. It's like in Judaism, in the Old Testament, they say you're not allowed to write on the Sabbath. It's one of the laws that you can't do. So what do they tell you? Don't touch the pen. They don't tell you don't write. They say don't touch the pen. They're trying to bring fences closer so you don't do something that you're not allowed to do. The exact same thing in shooting. We want to get to the position where the safety of a gun, it's always, always, always closed, unless it's always unsafe, unless I want to shoot. I never pull a trigger unless I have an objective of shooting around. I shouldn't be doing that during a test when I'm checking the weapon. This is my thought. Now, in the IDF, initially, I wasn't in charge of that. I was in charge of teaching everyone how to shoot. I wasn't in charge of what are the safety rules on checking an M4 or a Tavor. I'm never going to forget this my whole life. Probably 2006, give or take. I may be off a bit. We had a NCO school. Our NCO guys would go into the territories. During your 3 months training to be a sergeant, you would do some of it in the territories. And, arrest and guard and whatever. You'd be going from house to house. And inside the territories, you would always have a magazine in your gun. In the rest of Israel, inside of Israel, you do not carry a magazine inside your M4 or your Tavor. I think that's wrong, but that's the law. So a guy cleaned his gun in his room during this course, and he put the magazine back in. He checked the gun with the magazine in, because he's a friggin' idiot, and he shot his friend in the back from one infantry to another infantry. Fortunately, he didn't kill him. It didn't hit the spine or anything. It was not good. So when a situation like that happens, there's a stoppage of everything, and then you bring in the brigadier generals and the colonels and trying to figure out what happened, lessons learned kind of thing. So they brought me to that meeting. And I went to the brigadier general who was in charge of the entire infantry. And he was there with the colonel of the base where the mistake happened. And I told him my thought. I always thought and felt, even though I wasn't in charge of it, that the way we should check a gun is to cock it 3 times. Don't open up safety, don't pull the trigger. If I forgot the magazine in, I'll see 2 bullets leaving the gun. Oops, I fucked up. Let me take out the gun and clear the bullet out. It gives me time if I screwed up. If I did screw up and I did check the gun with the magazine in, which should never happen, but it happens, guys, hundreds of times a year in the IDF, not 1 or 2, okay? It happens. We can say it shouldn't happen, you're right. We're not disciplined. It's a problem. So there's a saying in the Old Testament, "Lifnei iver LTC Mikey," in front of a blind man, don't put an obstacle. Doing stuff that a soldier can make a mistake, you as the guy who's writing the doctrine, must make a doctrine that protects him even from himself. So the basic thing that I always taught, cock it 3 times. Never open up the safety, never pull the trigger. You forgot your magazine in, 2 bullets out, oops, you screwed up, you take out the magazine, you take it out. You'll never get a bullet, a live round that's stuck in the chamber. You'll get shells stuck all the time. People think there's a bullet. It's never a bullet. It gets hot, the shell, it doesn't extract, and the next bullet can't come in. It's not a bullet in there, it's a shell, I promise you that, okay? So I used to teach this in officer cadet school, but I would tell them, guys, I'm not in charge. It's not my law to make. This is my feeling. This is what I think it should be, but I'm not the colonel in charge of the division of safety. So I'm in front of the side of this brigadier general, and I tell him my spiel. I tell him, I think if they would have cocked it 3 times, nothing would have happened, and he'd be safe. He said, you know what, Mikey, that's brilliant. Never heard you say that. I didn't know you thought that. Let's change the rule. We changed the rule in all the infantry. After about a month, there was this guy named Gvaram, who was the colonel in charge of safety. He heard that we changed the rule without asking him. He went ape shit. What are you talking about? I know Mikey says that. He's wrong. If you guys don't have the authority to make that call, it's my call. I'm changing it back. As you see in Hebrew, he made me like a little ant. He made me really, really small. So inside of like a week afterwards, they changed it right back. 2 weeks later, tank division in South Lebanon. Same exact story. Soldier cleaned his gun in his room, put the magazine in, checked the gun, and this time, when he misfired, he killed his friend in the room. 2 weeks. 2 weeks after this shit. Now someone died. Someone dies in the IDF, it's in front of the chief of staff. It's in front of the head of the army. He's like my brother. His daughter was a soldier of mine. I was at his house for parent day. It's in front of him. His name's Ashkenazi. He was the Secretary of State once afterwards. Now Gvaram, this guy of the safety, his balls are shaking because this guy's going to get freaking kicked out of the army because, they didn't listen to me. Someone's dead because they didn't listen to me. It's not ego shit. I was going to go to the guy's parents. I was freaking out. I took this really hard. So he calls me before the chief of staff, before we have the meeting there. He says, Mikey, let's talk again about your system of checking weapon. He came to my base, the Adam base, the anti-terror school. And we go into this range. It was range 11. I remember it like yesterday. And I showed him that even if you have a bullet inside and you take out the extraction pin out of the frigging bolt, it still comes out just from gravity because we check it at 60 degrees. He says to me, listen, I'm going to change the rule in the entire army. We're going to do exactly what you say. But when the chief of staff asks you, when it's your turn to talk in front of the EU, when we're doing this thing, you don't say anything. You have nothing to say. I thought for maybe a quarter of a second. I said, no problem. Got to be my turn. A few days later, we were in front of the chief of staff. He says, Mikey, you have anything to say? I said, no, sir, I got nothing to say. And that's how the law has changed, and that's how the entire Israeli army checks a weapon, is cocking it 3 times. It's smarter. It's hard for people to understand, I cannot tell you how many people think, no, you have to verify, you have to verify, you got to pull the trigger. If you don't pull the trigger, you never know. It's change of concept, but how many hundreds of soldiers in the last, I don't know, 15 years are now alive or not wounded because we changed that? All of the accidental mischarges, all of them are gone during checking the weapon. It just vanished. In 1 second, vanished. People are alive because we changed that rule. It's very difficult to do the change, especially when you were taught so many times to open up the safety and pull the trigger. But I wanted to get into the psyche of the soldier. The psyche was, don't have him all the time pulling the trigger during the day. You know, that we were checking the gun 5-7 times a day. It got just so used to it. It wasn't even a thing to open up a safety. It wasn't unusual to pull the trigger. It's something you do just for the hell of it. Just when I'm checking the gun. And if we can get into his psyche, the only time you ever open up that safety, the only time you pull that trigger, the only time is when you actually want to shoot something. Then it's much easier to teach. So that's how we got to the system in the IDF, whether it's the Tavor or the M4, that you sit there and you pull it back 3 times. That's what you do. Then you look, you see that nothing's there, and then you let it go. With a Tavor, you do it 45 downwards. Why? Because it's a bullpup, and you can't see the bolt here because the bolt's over here. So you do it this way with a Tavor. So that's the only difference between a Tavor and M4. I hope that was interesting. I hope you learned something. Appreciate it. Be safe.